the underlying premise is there is no science without language. What that means is language is oral language, written language, speaking, reading, all of those great pieces. And what we're trying to do is purposefully set up opportunities for kids to negotiate meaning through science inquiry in that form of language. So you're thinking about oral language and written language and reading and negotiating meaning and thinking. All of those have to happen within the context and do happen within the context of the day. So our SWH classrooms and teachers purposefully set up environments in which that can happen, in which students can constantly negotiate meaning through language and an embedded approach to learning. Thinking about, are we reading to learn? Are we writing to learn? Are we speaking to learn? Are we listening to learn? We can kind of cluster standards in ELA under those pieces and operate both at the same time. So that's, I think, a very powerful premise for our students in learning within the context of science. Totally embedded approach. Teachers then interact and think about, well, that question is a yes or no question. Is that going to lead us to an investigation? And if we see lots of yes and no questions on our board, great opportunity for teachers to structure that environment and create a mini lesson where they say, let's stop for just a second. Let's think about, if that question can be answered with a yes or no, how is that going to help us to further our understanding? That's a Google search we can find out in a minute and go on. We need thicker questions with whys and hows. So let's talk about how we can format that. Mini lesson, 5 minutes. We've got great opportunity for better questioning then. The template is really a graphic organizer that helps us think about what's our question, what did we see happen, and in that place we can use a lot of visual representation. We can draw it, we can write about it, we can have our teacher write about it for us if we're still at that oral language representation and can't quite get our thoughts down on paper, or our friends can help us do that. We think about what is the answer to that question based on what we saw, and we make a claim. So lots of analyzing and thinking throughout, lots of use of language, because I have to negotiate that with my partner, with whom I'm investigating. I also have to negotiate it with my whole class eventually. So then you get into public discourse, which becomes that idea of speaking to learn and speaking to understand. Again, that's a great place where teachers can say, hold on just a second. I hear a lot of disagreeing, but not in a very respectful way. So we can set up that environment to say, I agree with you because, I disagree with you because, and starting to think about what are some other things that people do when they're negotiating their understanding. We can set up some sentence frames and some templates then for them to think about, I agree with you because of this, this, and this. Can you tell me more about this, this, and this? And helping students to understand how we in the real world agree and disagree with others respectfully. And learning about argumentation, which is critical for science and for everything in life, learning to do that in a good way. Within the SWH approach then, once you have finished that first, although you're really never finished, but you finish that first investigation and you're still thinking and being reflective, we go to what we call asking the experts. And I think this is one of my favorite pieces because we get into literature and we get into the nonfiction parts of text, something that students need and love and enjoy. And now they have a reason to do that because they want to know if the experts agree with what they have found. And so there's this instantaneous, yes, let's look, let's find out. So teachers create that environment where there are lots of books to look at. If they're going online, they say, here are good sites in which you will find that, and help them to negotiate that aspect and that medium in terms of learning. Then they go from that aspect to beginning to really start to think and compare. How do my ideas compare and contrast with those of the experts? So in reading, we can do that, and we can write it and look, and that really forces students to be analytical and critical thinkers. Okay, some more. Here's another claim. Here's some more evidence. How does that agree or disagree? Then the big task is a summary writing at the end of the unit. That summary writing is, yes, writing to learn, but the audience changes. The audience becomes an authentic audience. We've found through the research that writing to a younger audience forces students to think differently, to really negotiate their own understanding. Because if I say, write to me, I'm your teacher, I already know what you know. So the words that you use will be different than the words you use when you're writing to a younger audience. We can then very carefully look at our ELA standards and say, you know, we need to write a letter. We need to be able to do an argumentative piece. We need to compare and contrast. So how can I build those purposefully into that and give students choice about what they do? When they do that, when teachers set that up and give that purpose and choice, then what we see again is an opportunity for students to really become metalinguistic. Just recently I was reading something, and this really fascinates me because I've often thought about the idea of being metacognitive, and we talk about that a lot, thinking about one's thinking. There's also this idea of becoming metalinguistic, and when you're metalinguistic, that happens for children during their school age years. And at that point in their lives, they're able to begin to think about how they use language to communicate their ideas. And they see it as a different vehicle than when they were little and just speaking. Now it's, how do I really communicate effectively? In the SWH approach, when we do that, we've created an opportunity that for them then to really begin to think about what words am I going to use to convey my understanding to that authentic audience. If I'm a 5th grader and I'm writing to a 3rd grader about a topic or making a book for a 3rd grader, I have to think about my language very carefully and make sure I'm building in enough knowledge for them to be able to understand that concept. So really it's that idea of we're reading to learn throughout, especially near the end. We're writing to learn constantly. We are engaging in purposeful discourse with speaking to learn. And then we kind of wrap it all together and change the audience and think about writing to someone else. We're still summarizing, we're still being analytical, we're still writing to learn, but we're helping others to learn as well. Children actually invent language within the context of their environment as well. So when we set up an environment purposefully to allow language to occur, to allow children to explore language, that makes a richer environment for learning all around. Language is a part of everyday life. It's built into the classroom. You're speaking, you're learning, you're listening all the time. That means that we have to structure things so that students feel safe in exploring language. They feel safe in saying, I think I need to know more about this. Help me understand. We provide purposeful wait time way longer than we think. Some students need 30 to 45 seconds of wait time to process their language and be able to share it with others. Embedding those language practices, teachers have to be well aware of that time that's needed to negotiate that meaning and get it out, to be able to be shared with others. So that nurturing environment while you're pushing them, supportive enough that you can push them to the next level. Tell me more about. So that's what the great SWH teachers do, is tell me more about. I don't know. Why do you think that happens? And then allowing time for them to explore and negotiate that meaning. When we think about questioning and that use of discourse within the classroom and argumentation, we talked a little bit about the idea that questions can be thin or thick. Questions can be just the basic yes/no kinds of things, or and those really don't help us in an investigation and in an inquiry. All they do is lead us to, okay, I know that's a fact, I can use that, but how do I use that fact? So we have to be very purposeful about moving those questions up a level of critical thinking. So we start asking questions like that too, and we help reframe those. So if a student says, is or will this do this, we'll say, what if we added, how will doing this help you do this? Or why will? In what ways will? So just beginning to think about that and posting. Often in SWH classrooms you see questions, question words, use this, use this, use this, use this. And if those are posted, it helps the teacher to do that. I know that when I was first doing this approach in my classroom, I had a list of Bloom's questions on the side of the board, and I kept them there purposefully. They were for me as well as for the students, so that when I asked a question, I didn't ask a yes or no question. I asked a higher level thinking question, or said to say to them, tell me more about, and why do you think that? Rather than, great, fine. Why do you think that, and what are you going to do because of what you think? Those were helpful for me, and they were also helpful for the student. And it takes a while. It's not an instantaneous thing, because we're used to asking questions as teachers that lead to, is this the answer? Is this the answer? And students are used to also responding to that, so it takes a while to set that up. In a typical classroom, when we're talking about discourse between teachers and students, there is this idea that, and I'm going to look and talk right to you, so I'll say, here's my question for you. And the student responds to me. And then I ask another question, and another student responds to me. And another student responds to me. So it's more of a ping pong, back and forth, back and forth. And in an SWH classroom, what you're doing is taking yourself and removing yourself as a teacher back a little bit. So you may pose the question, but what you're asking is, student A respond to student B. And the expectation for students is that they will then move away from direct response to me, but move back to student discourse and opportunity. And for a teacher to do, when we're used to that IRE kind of response, that initiate, respond, evaluate. So what we're really thinking about is even how you set up your environment. In a classroom where it's rows, it's real easy to do ping pong, back and forth. If you want students to respond to each other and question each other, you have to set your environment differently. You have to put them in groups. You have to move it to a circle so that they can look at each other and respond. Provide them with lots of opportunities to talk to one another and use those prompts. Talk to them. Ask that next question. And so if one student responds, we often will also say, you tell me more, Susie, so that it keeps going around to kind of get that idea moving. So it's a very different looking classroom and very different approach to the idea of language interaction between teachers and students. Everything we do is based on, let's get something down on paper and let's write and learn and think. So the idea of the heuristic is that idea of the template. So students, we never want it to be a worksheet. We want it to be a way for them to organize their thinking. So when they have an initial question, we may have a class question, the student takes ownership of that and writes it down so that they know and can keep focused about what they're doing. They write down everything that they might see happen. So they learn to think about representing that maybe in terms of graphs and tables, maybe in terms of a picture. So they're writing what they see and what they observe and why they think that might happen. That whole idea of being a reflective learner and writing in my journal and thinking about what I'm doing and then looking back at my journal to figure out, did my ideas change from today to yesterday? Because that's a big thing too. Students and all of us have a hard time realizing that we have changed our ideas. And writing provides a record of what we thought on Tuesday. And now it's Friday and we've done another couple of experiments and we look back and we go, ooh, I don't have the same thinking here. It's a great way to show evidence of student growth is right there in your journals. It's right there in summary writing. Just really an opportunity for students to see writing as a way to learn and not as a task that they have to do because it's English time and I must write a paper. We see much longer things, much longer artifacts and much more powerful artifacts when they're given something purposeful to think about and write about. Linguistic, you, like I said, are beginning to really be able to think about what word might I use there? Wait a minute, I can use language in a different way. And you're manipulating the language skills as well as manipulating you're manipulating the words you choose. And you really do start to see that in children in grade school, and in very verbal children in preschool. You see them purposely choosing that word to represent that meaning rather than a word they just used a week ago. So within the SWH approach and that whole idea of metalinguistic, it is the process of understanding and using language differently. When we think about vocabulary and vocabulary building, the research is very clear on vocabulary building. Giving students a list of words to memorize and saying, here's 5 random words, here's the definition, now keep that. We don't hold those words in our vocabulary. The only way to learn a word is to use it in multiple ways and to use all of the meanings. We're looking at the shades of meaning within a word when we're really learning that word deeply. It really just blends itself naturally to what we know about good vocabulary instruction. Repeated exposure, using multiple meanings of that, understanding when and why it's appropriate to use it, and we're really using what Isabel Beck and others would call a Tier 3 science word in multiple ways, and really developing that understanding of that technical word to use in other places. So when we're thinking about the idea of language and the idea of science, we of course have really stringent standards for English language arts. We have a lot of things that we have to be able to teach students, and we want to be able to do that in very purposeful ways, not in isolated ways, but in purposeful ways. We also have a really nice set of standards for science too, so we're really thinking about how to embed those two together and bring them to a place where we're teaching both as we're moving through the day. So the SWH approach allows us to do that because we're thinking about taking that standard and turning it from a statement that sounds like a standard to a big idea, which may encompass several standards and pull them together. Same thing happens when we're thinking about the ELA standards. In ELA standards, we have standards for speaking. We have standards for reading and comprehending. That idea of close reading has come out a lot in the ELA standards. And so in the SWH approach, we really are doing close reading when we compare with the experts. We have to figure out, what did that expert say about this question, and how are they going to, how is that idea different than what I have? That's close reading. I have to look at my own work and say, wow, I see this. Now over here I see this. And I need to figure out what evidence the author has to support the claim they have, and how is that evidence different than my evidence. So that's really that idea of, I can group that broadly into we read to learn. I can also think about we read, write, listen, and speak to learn through the use of a variety of media so that I can better understand the world around me. That can be a really large, encompassing big idea that could incorporate all those different strands. Science is the understanding of everything in the world around us, everything that's natural in the world around us. So it's important for the student to have a deeper understanding of that, of a concept level rather than of a single factoid level. I learned a lot about science as a student in the science classroom. Much of what I may have learned might have been facts that I never connected to the bigger world. I might have learned that something about frogs, and they do this, this, and this, or they have these, and these parts. But the bigger idea is, for a conceptual understanding, is how does that system of the frog support another system of the frog, and how does that frog then support its ecosystem around it? So it's a bigger idea. It's not just about those facts. It's about how they all connect to make a concept. So in really thinking about science instruction, I need to move beyond just teaching the facts to teaching how those work in a conceptual framework and in a conceptual way. So that to me is really the teaching of science in a purposeful, meaningful way, is how do I help you understand how this system works with this system, works with this system in the world around us.